Right then, in this video we're doing something a little bit different. Today we are going to be looking at the history of Gillingham, and the reason why is because the history of Gillingham is a little bit more obscure than other places. For example, what about Essex? Over in Essex everything looks like a flat wasteland. You can easily tell the development of towns in Essex because it's just houses plonked into an empty featureless field. And if you look at most Essex towns, it's literally just houses placed in the field. And that's all the development there is. It's just not that interesting. But on the other hand, Gillingham in Medway is quite interesting because it's a bit harder to tell the history. When you walk around the streets, everything's a bit more obscure. You can't really tell the development of the town so well. So that's why I'm making a video on it. Let's go. On your screen right now is an Ordnance Survey map of the present day of Gillingham, and in this video we're going to be going back in the past. We've got maps here going back, but before we look at that, there's something to note is that Gillingham used to have an interesting historic feature, and that was you could date pretty much every single building. So as every house and all other types of building, you could just instantly know the date of them because every building has a street cover outside of it for where the water goes in the building, and this street cover has the date the street cover was made, and in the majority of cases this was when the house was built. So you could look at a house and go, oh, that house over there is from 1891. All you'd have to do is look at the pavement and you can tell the date of every single building. It was interesting, but thanks to Southern Water, you cunts removed this interesting piece of history from Gillingham when Gillingham was put onto water meter. As well as them putting up the prices of everyone's water, they removed history. It's disgusting. That's pissed me off. Another little feature of history removed. And over the years I've lived here, there's been lots of history just removed. Often little things. Each little thing itself doesn't really add up to much, but as a collective, as all the little features, and most of them are now gone, it just makes the place less interesting. For example, you walk along the street and go, oh, that little building over there, that's the original waiting room for the trams. That shows that there used to be trams here. But that's gone. Then there'd be historic lampposts also gone. There's just little things that Medway Council doesn't care about stuff like that. All they care about is Rochester, and any other bit of history other than tourist history gets removed. But that is a subject for another day. Let's start this video. So we can go back in time on all these maps: 1929 to 1952, 1907 to 1923, 1897 to 1900, and 1871 to 1890. Now before I just show you these older maps to see how Gillingham changed, the first map is 1929 to 1952. That's a bit of a big jump, so before we go back quite that far, some things from a bit nearer to look at. For example, 1960s. This is what a high street looked like in the 1960s. Notice it is not pedestrianised. If you look at present day, pedestrian only. So you look at a building, so we look on the right, these buildings are still here. You've got that building with the weird bit above it and that building there. Let's take a look at present day and see it's still there. Quite tatty to be honest, but it shows that these buildings are still here, and it can be hard to judge some of these photos. In some places all the buildings have changed, and when all the buildings have changed, these historic pictures look like, are you sure that's Gillingham? It looks like a different place. But these buildings are still here, and you can date buildings by the lift. For example, this building was built in the 70s, or maybe the 60s possibly, because it's got a 1970s Evans dumbwaiter. Then if we go up here to Boots looking very tatty. Fuck me, what a tat fest that is. That's got a 1950s Evans dumbwaiter, and so you can tell the dates that way of buildings. Now if we go to this picture again, what's on the left? What is that building? I've never seen that before. And if you just saw that bit on the left without in context of the rest of the street, I couldn't even tell it was Gillingham. I've never seen that building. What's happened to Co-op Department Store? Co-op Department Store was built in the 70s, so after that picture was taken. So that picture was taken after that 60-70 shop on the right was built, before the 70 shop on the left was built. So you don't see it. Co-op Department Store is there. And Co-op Department Store was interesting because it was like going back in time. It never updated from the 70s. You go in and be like, wow, I'm back in time, I'm back in the past. It had a 1970s Pickerings, but as they never updated their shop, shop went bankrupt. Shop's gone. It's now Wilco's on the downstairs and Sports Direct on the upstairs. And sadly, the Pickerings lift has now been replaced. Anyway, let's go back to the historic maps. Oh no, before we go to historic maps, we've got another picture, and that is another bit of Gillingham High Street. Notice on the left, pre-war boys. You've got black and white stripes, that gives away it's pre-war boys, and look at the font, look at the red circle around the outside, and the spacings of the different sizes. Yeah, that's pre-war boys. War boys was the updating of the road signs, updating them all to modern day signs, and in the modern day you still occasionally see original pre-war boys signs, but really old signs. Now if you look on the right over here, you've got Stanton and Staveley. Stanton and Staveley's were well built. Fuck me, they were well built. The original ones from 1950s, 1960s were so big and heavy, they could last 200 years. They built these things so well. The tops got replaced. There was a fault where the join of the top, the swan deck top, to the rest of the lamppost exposed water, and then the metal inside the concrete rusted. So they've all had their tops replaced. But the base of these lampposts, a lot of them are still there, despite back there from the 50s. Very impressive, they're so well built. Okay, it's now time to start with going back in time on the maps. So we're first going to look at this map, 1929 to 1952. Here it is, and I can tell you that this map dates from the beginning of that date range. This map is from 1929 to 1930, and the reason how I can tell it's the beginning of that date range is, what's that running down the high street? Trams. Gillingham used to have trams, something just unthinkable in the modern day. To think there was actually trams running through this town is so strange. And there's some weird bits to it, such as single track in the middle of the street. So I say in that date there would have been a street with cars would run both directions, but with a single tram track going up the middle. There wasn't much traffic. There was a lot of traffic on that street. There'd be conflicts. So this shows how old this tram system was. It wasn't designed to work with many cars about, because back then there wouldn't have been that many cars. But we're going to talk about the trams more later on, because trams are interesting. There's a lot of stuff to say on them. But before we take a look at the trams, there's other interesting things we need to talk about, such as the houses. Just stop. Yeah, not all the houses were there. Back in 1930, they're still building Gillingham outwards, and some of the houses are missing. And the football club, Gillingham Football Club, it's not swamped by houses. It's just out there a bit more on its own. That's weird to think. So it's now time to go back in time a bit more. We now go back in time to 1907 to 1923. It's not that much different. The reason for that is we haven't gone that far back in time from the last map. So it's not really that much difference between this map and the one we saw previously. So with that said, let's now go further back in time. Let's go back in time to 1897 to 1900. And there's some changes here. Gillingham has shrunk. It's even smaller than it was. Wow, there's not much Gillingham. And it's so weird to think that Gillingham was small and just little. It's like a little town back then. And notice, where's the trams gone? Yep, no trams anymore. The trams weren't yet built at this point. We look at a football club. Wow, it's just right out there on its own. There's no houses at all next to it apart from a couple of houses. Look at Gordon Road. Hasn't even fully been built yet. There's lots of houses missing from Gordon Road. And look at all the other roads. They're just not there. That is so weird to think. There's so many houses just missing. Look at all of this. Like, it has houses everywhere, but none of them are there. Well, in certain places the houses are missing. It's just, wow. Let's go back in time further. Let's go back to 1871 to 1890. Fuck me, Gillingham was small back then. Wow, that is small. Look, it's just that. That's all there was to it. Just the high street and a few houses nearby. And look at you actually getting ready to build the houses, all the different plots, and you've actually got some roads there. Look at those roads ready for the building of the houses. Football club's not even there. Look how small it is. Now if you just go forward for a minute to 1897 to 1900, back when the football club was there, notice the name. New Brompton Football and Athletic Ground. It was called New Brompton. So to go back to 1871, when this town was first being built, they originally named it New Brompton. This is named to go alongside Old Brompton. There's Old Brompton there, there's New Brompton. And Old Brompton is next to the dockyard. Dockyard? What dockyard am I talking about? That dockyard. A mystery empty space on the map. Yeah, they didn't show the dockyards in those days. Anything military was left off. You've also got the military base there. completely left off. It's like blank spaces, but it's obvious where the military bases are. Anyone who wants to know where they are, we just look for. There's a big blank space right next to a development. It's obvious as military, but nevertheless, they still felt a need to hide them from the map. There's some odd things about Gillingham, well, back then, New Brompton. For example, where is Gillingham? Gillingham's over here. Gillingham Old Town was just that. Just a little tiny village, and notice the shape of it. That's typical to quite a few other villages. It's like a little bit of road there called a green with some old buildings around it and a church. As that's all Gillingham was. Let's take a look. There is. Now, if you didn't know this was Gillingham Village, you just walk past and never know, because it's not necessarily obvious, especially when you've got loads of houses about. You've got nothing special about this. It's just so what. But just think about small villages. They look like this. This was originally a green, so I had a road going around a little green bit in the middle. And obviously there have been more green in the past than there is now. Church there at the back. Yep, it's just a little village. And that's all Gillingham used to be. Now, this 50s housing there used to be old housing. If you look on the map, this is from 1871, you can see Christmas Street has houses on it. The layout of that street is completely changed. Those houses would be from like 1870s or maybe even earlier. So these very early houses were torn down and replaced in the 50s with these houses. And when these houses were built, well, all of this area had vintage Aleco lampposts. But until very recently, there was a surviving original Aleco lamppost. Another interesting little feature of Medway. Medway used to have lots of little things that would remind you, oh, this place is actually historic, it goes back a long way. Like you just walk around, there'd be little things just going, oh, that's that feature there, that little building. That's actually a tram waiting room. That's where people waited for their trams back a long time ago. And little things make places interesting. But Medway Council couldn't care less about the little things of a town. All they care about is tourist history. The history that brings tourists. Interesting local history they don't care about. And this vintage original lamppost, still with its original swan neck, sadly has been removed. Depressing. So if we go back to Gillingham Village, when this Google Street View was taken, if we go up here, what's that? That is the tram waiting room. That is a toilet block and tram waiting room place. That's where people used to wait for their trams. The trams terminated here, in the middle of the street. Because back then, not many cars, but literally trams just pull up in the middle of the street, and just stop right in the middle of the street, people would walk across the street to get it. And that's where the trams terminated. So weird to think those trams. Just look at the street. Just couldn't imagine a tram going down that street. And there's things like that. That's what makes Gillingham interesting. But sadly, that's gone. That tram toilets and waiting room has gone. They pulled it down. What else can I say really? I just find that kind of stuff depressing. Even that building has been altered, because that wall there, that wasn't original. Originally it was just that bit, and then they made a little extension there, but now it's gone. Depressing. So, let's talk about the trams. Let's go forward in time, all the way forwards to 1929, because 1929 is a good point to look at for history, because that's when you got the trams. And you can see the trams just running about. And interestingly, they didn't make it down the hill. The steep hill, that steep hill there, was too steep for trams. They couldn't get them down that hill. So they just terminated it there. Look, it was double track running down the street, then it switches to single track in the middle of the street and stops right there, right by the tram waiting room and toilets there, and that's where the tram finished. If you go down the hill that's too steep for trams to get up, there's more trams at the bottom. There's another tram route. Now that road there, see that road there? That's now a dual carriageway. That is a busy road. To think it had trams going down, but not just trams, a single track tramway in the middle of a busy road. Well, obviously back then it wasn't a busy road, and today if you had a single track tramway with trams going both directions on a single track tramway, where cars were going along the same bit, that had been cause for an accident. But back then there weren't any cars, or very few cars about, with little passing places there in the middle of the road. But the tram goes round weirdly. Round like that. I don't even think that bit of road even exists like that today. That's changed, because that bomb there is now a roundabout. And it goes into the Strand, so that bit has completely, that layout there has completely changed. And the trams went up and ended here at the Strand. Now let's take a look at the Strand, because there's some interesting things to be said, such as the swimming pool. Let's take a look at the swimming pool here. Now we're currently looking at 1930s, 1929, and the pool's there. If we go back to 1907, the pool's still there. If we go back to 1897, it's still there. If we go back to 1871, Okay, it doesn't exist. Strand wasn't there back then. So that pool is old, very old. It's built sometime between 1897 and 1900. Well, probably maybe even older than that actually. Maybe, I don't even know when it was built, but that is an old pool. That's crazy to think that swimming pool was there from such a long time ago. It looks quite basic in that picture. It really looks like quite a basic pool. If we go and look in the modern day, yeah, it's changed a lot. Still thoroughly cold. It's still absolutely freezing. I wouldn't recommend swimming in that pool. It's just so cold. And if we look at a Strand, back in the past, these pictures from the 1950s, things were different. For example, as well as the main swimming pool, there's also these other pools. These pools are long gone. These pools don't exist anymore. But look at, you had a boating pool down there and another paddling pool there. Then let's take a look at another picture. That's a picture of a boating lake. To be honest, that looks grim. I know it's a black and white picture, but that water must be freezing. Yeah, that facility, that doesn't pass modern day health and safety, no way. And here's a picture of the Strand. You've got a Stanton Staveley classic. And look how busy it is. And in the next picture, fuck me, that's busy. That's like beach. Back then, people couldn't afford to travel. Even going down to the seaside. And there's direct trains to the seaside down at Margate from Gillingham. But it was too expensive. People didn't have much money here. So people went to the Strand. And how could the Strand be busy like that? It's just the Strand. It's a shithole in the modern day. But back then, everyone went to it. And this picture, there's not much differences in this picture. The only difference is that wooden fence is a different style of wooden fence. And that big fence there is now smaller. But other than that, that picture's identical almost to modern day. So interesting, some bits change, some bits don't. In this picture here, that is Gillingham High Street. Now that's going back to when there was trams in Gillingham High Street. So let's go back to historic maps and we can look up to where Gillingham High Street is. Currently we're looking at, let's go forward a bit in time back to when there's trams. So we've now gone forward to 1930, just so we can see when the trams were there. And that's the tram route going through the High Street. It's weird, you've got the route there, that's the route to the Strand. The route to the Strand comes into High Street there. That route there was the original planned route to the Strand, but they never made it to the Strand because of that hill, the Gillingham hill where Gillingham Village is too steep for them to get up. And you've got a junction there, and that's what you're looking at, that's that junction. Doesn't that look strange? Very strange. But in the next picture we can see those two buildings are still there. Take a look at that building and look at that building. And those are still there. It's so weird that you'd think there's actually trams running down there. Must have been a lot less busy. And the whole look of the street is completely different. I find all of this stuff interesting. You look at the next picture. This is the trams being built. Now this is over in Chatham. So let's go back to our historic maps. And we're now going to go up to Chatham. We've got the route going up this way. Now notice that this is actually a bus route now. You've got buses going up this route. Now links into a junction there. Now it goes off to Rainham. We'll go off to Rainham later. But notice single track. A bi-directional single track in the middle of a very, very busy road. Well, the road is very busy in the modern day. That is weird. Now if we go this way, it goes down Chatham Hill. Interesting, I actually got up Chatham Hill. How fast those trams have gone up that? And that hill's so steep, I imagine they only went 5 miles an hour up that hill. And buses even struggle a bit to go up that hill in the modern day. Especially right by street lights, now underpowered they are. Wow, that is just weird to think. Wow, I couldn't get down the hill at Gillingham Village, but I could get up Chatham Hill. And you've got that junction there, which I believe I've got a picture of that junction. We'll come back onto that later. And interesting, it doesn't go through Chatham High Street. Instead goes around Chatham High Street along this road here. And what is missing? Where's the Pentagon Centre? Pentagon Centre's not there. And this picture here, we need to go up Military Road a bit. And notice the shrubbery, that's still there today. It's changed a bit from how it looked there, but that bit is actually still there. But Pentagon Centre's not there. Go up, you go under the road there, and there's a junction there. Oh, interestingly, you got a little bit of track that goes up to Chatham train station. It finishes at Chatham train station. That's strange. A little bit of branch that doesn't go anywhere. Then you got that bit going up Chatham Hill. So, not Chatham Hill, that is Maidstone Road. Yeah, so if we look at a picture, you can see them putting in the tracks. This must be like 1900, digging up the road and putting in the tram tracks. In the next picture, we've got some more pictures of the trams. We've got this picture here, Rochester. Actually, you can tell that place, that building here hasn't changed. But the trams, that is so weird. That is so weird to see it like that. Then you've got trams there waiting at, I think that's at Chatham Dockyard, I think. You got a picture of a tram there, I can't tell where that is. And this picture. That is a very sad picture of when the trams are finished with. In the 1930s, they were got rid of. They were too slow. I can imagine these trams must have gone 20 miles an hour max. They must have been slow, maybe even less. I dread to think how long journeys took on them. And then at this point, buses had came out. So you got the new diesel buses coming out. And trams just were useless. It was in a way short-sighted. Because to have trams in the modern day, in Medway, it's like a lot of people dream of it like, they want to bring back the trams. Well, Medway actually had trams. But the system would need massive upgrades, especially to work around cars with all of the bi-directional single-track routes in the middle of a road. Once the car was invented and came out, all of that would have to be changed, and overall it was just too much money, and they were so slow compared to buses. So they were got rid of. They actually sold off these trams to become people's sheds. People could go along and buy the tram at the price of scrap metal just to take it away to be got rid of. And a lot of them were used for sheds, but I don't believe any are still in existence as sheds. It would be nice to have a tram as a shed in your garden. I believe one of these trams survives at a tram museum somewhere, but I'm not too sure. And there you can see the routes. So you've got the Rainham. But interesting, the Rainham route, according to us, finished in Chatham, and that junction there, you couldn't get to Strand, so it didn't go all the way to Strand. It went Rainham to Chatham, and you had the route there. It says it only starts at Shoulders Arms, wherever the fuck that is. That was the extent of the Strand. So it started at the Strand, and that route, I'm not too sure exactly where these routes went. So this is slightly confusing. I mean, the routes went through, then you got a route up to Strand there, and the route up to Finsbury. Well, interesting, I brought it all the way to Borstal. They were originally planning to run it up Maidstone Road and down to Maidstone to connect with the Maidstone trams, but a hill got too steep. That hill down there, Bluebell Hill, that was such a steep hill they couldn't run the trams up it. So interesting, you've got old pictures. The next picture, okay, we're moving on to Rochester Bridge now. So before we look at it, let's look this way. So we go along this way, along New Road, along there, past Bart's, there's Bart's Hospital there. Go along there and down this way. You've got the route off to Borstal there. That route still exists as a bus route. And, oh, in this picture, doesn't show the trams. That's weird. It doesn't actually show the tram route going along Rochester High Street, even though there definitely was a route along there. And that went along to this bridge. Your trams already got rid of. This is the 1930 map, and they were got rid of around then. So did they already pull up the track on that bridge? That's very weird. In this picture you can see that's the Rochester Bridge. But what's on the right? That bit just there on the right is different. That bridge is still there, minus the tram tracks. But the bridge on the right, look, that bit over there is different. Because originally there was 2 railway bridges and 1 road bridge. The middle bridge was completely rebuilt into a 2nd road bridge, and now there's this 1 railway bridge. Also, there was 2 Rochester stations. Look at that. The station for the Charing Cross line was separate to the station to the Victoria line. So those 2 were separate train companies. The Charing Cross line and the Victoria line were different lines back then. Completely segregated. Rival companies. And the weird thing is Rochester Station was then moved. Rochester Station has been moved down to there. You got Rochester. Interestingly, that was the new Rochester Station that was built there. Then that was then got rid of, and then they've relocated Rochester Station just a few years ago back to where the historic station used to be. So that station's been moved twice. That's interesting. And that's where, look, then on this picture you can see it. You've got there the road bridge, road and tram bridge, that's still there today, and behind it you've got 2 rail bridges. And wow, that picture has just come up now. That's interesting. Buzz whizzing through water. That's a nice picture. And here we've got a picture. That's back at Chatham. So if we go back again to Chatham, where we were talking about earlier, that's hill going up past Chatham, and there we can see that same bit in the modern day. So that's back. So I'm jumping about a bit, but that's back over in Chatham where we were discussing about just a minute ago. And that's the hill. That's where they're digging up laying the tracks. That picture of them laying the tracks was just there. You've got the statue. Everyone keeps putting a cone on his head. There, Chatham Station's up there, but a little branch to Chatham Station doesn't exist in that picture. You've got a tram going up there. Then in the modern day, it looks like that. You see that building is still there. See that building there is there. Chatham Station there, and the road to Maidstone is up there. And the weird statue. No, he doesn't have a cone on his head. Oh no, I can't show you that picture. We need a better picture. We need one where he's got a cone on his head. Don't say Google doesn't have it. Oh no, Google's not photographed him with a cone on his head. Oh, that's not good. That statue deserves to have a cone on his head. Anyway, let's look at our next picture. And here we are over in Rainham. Now this bit I want to show because this part's interesting. Let's go over to Rainham. So we've got up here, interesting junction they've got there, because that bit's been completely rebuilt. In the modern day, that's now a roundabout. Let's just go, let's look at it in the modern day. Notice the roundabout is completely different, that bit there. It's utterly rebuilt. Anyway, back to 1930. There was actually a junction. We got here up Chatham Hill. The tram must have struggled up that hill. Along to Watling Street, and a single track. Now this little bit there, it was actually ran segregated. Interestingly, this is the only part of the route that ran segregated. And weirdly of single track, because there's enough space in that segregated section for double track. That's like that bit's still there. In the modern day, you can still see the empty space where the trams used to run. Interesting, it was all single track. And I don't believe there's any signals. The trams did it all on timetable. So I wonder if there's any clashes where drivers start up too early and found a tram coming the other way. Along to Rainham Mark. Well, that's different. It was actually a little village called Rainham Mark back then. The name Rainham Mark exists today, but it's not a village, it's just more housing. Well, it looks like it was in a cussing or something just there. And they've got another passing place. This is like a little remote bit of tramway. It's weird to think that's a dual carriageway now it's running along next to. And along to High Street Rainham, where the tram just stops. This map's glitching, don't glitch. See, it just stops. Just there. Stops in the middle of the street, so trams just go along, middle of a busy junction, and tram just parks up. And here it is, parked up in the middle of what today is a busy junction. Imagine if a tram was just parked up in the middle of it now. Imagine the traffic jams and all the cars going beep, get out of the way. But back then there wasn't any cars. And we look at the other side of it, it's the same picture from the other side. And look how empty, everyone just walked across the street to the tram parked in the middle of the street. I'd get run over if I did that today. And if we look, that's what it looks like today. No way you could just have a tram. Now, see that car there? Just imagine a tram just stopped right in the middle, causing a traffic jam. And notice that has changed. If you look at that picture, look, Cricketer's Inn. Cricketer's Inn looks nothing like it did then. They've utterly extended. But that war monument, that is still there. Look at the picture. See the war monument there? So that shows that is actually the location. And you can tell it's location. You've got the church and the tram stopped there. So if you look, you can see that's there, then the church just there. So the tram parked up literally just here. Right where the picture is, that's where the tram parked up. That's strange to think at. Weird how places change so much. So that's the bit about the trams complete. So the next bit worth doing is aerial pictures, because it's very interesting to see this all as maps, but there's a few bits missing, and also the military bits are missing. So if we head down this way, there's a lot of forts in Gillingham, a lot of wartime forts where I go back older in the war. Is like old military forts from like 1860, I think a lot of them were built in, and then used in the First and Second World Wars. A lot were pulled down simply because it was too many. It was so many forts in Gillingham. Even though it'd be nice to preserve all of them, it wasn't realistic. It's like it's not worth over preserving stuff like route master buses. Route master buses are over preserved. There's too many of them. It can't be historic if you have too many. So it was too many forts. Some got removed. Now there was Gillingham Fort. If we go back to here, and Gillingham Fort was located there where Gillingham Piers is. That's stupid. That's a closed community just there. It's like all gated community, segregating themselves away. We don't want to be part of Gillingham. We want to be a closed community. Then there you've got the university housing there. For reference, that's where the Strand is. The Strand's next door to it. And there used to be Gillingham Fort. But this I couldn't find, because even if we go on historic, well, obviously on the historic maps it's missing. Actually, that I think is it there, but they wouldn't show it because obviously they didn't show military stuff. So now, to clarify this, we're going to look at aerial photography. So we can go 2008. Yeah, that's what it looks like, relatively modern. 1990. There's something about 1990s colour pictures. It gives it more character in the weird colours that they were in. And Gillingham Fort would have been there. But even if we go back to 1946, was that it? That little blob? I don't know. It's already gone. I don't think that's it then. That's a gas tower there. No, it's slightly to the west. I'm not too sure. Maybe they already bulldozed it at that point. Was that it? Is that it there? Actually, that could be it. Possibly. I don't know. Yeah, Gillingham Fort's gone. So even though sadly we can't see Gillingham Fort, we have got a couple more forts that were pulled down. So back to 2008. And now let's go up to Darland Banks. Here's Darland Banks. and you actually can see that was a fort in that middle bit. There's now 80s housing. There's nothing really much to say about 80s housing, it's quite boring. But if you go back to 1990s, that's what it looked like, no difference. 1946, oh look, where's that fort come from? There's Darling Banks Fort. That fort no longer exists today. Let's go back to 1990s, and then if we go the other way, there's some more forts. So we head up to Chatham, we've got Fort Luton. That used to be like a children's play park thing. I remember going to Fort Luton when I was a baby, and there is Fort Luton. That's still there today. I don't know what they're doing with it. I went there when I was a baby. It's like a baby's sort of model railway show thingy. And oh, Fort Luton Model Museum. Oh wow. But this is the modern day map. I've clicked on your modern day map, yet it still names it by the name it used to have in the 90s. It shows that things don't get updated even when. Now, so you got there Fort Horsted. Fort Horsted's still there. It's a business park place. If you ask nicely, I'll show you around. Although you probably can find a way into it if you want to do it without authorisation. You've got Fort Borstal. Fort Borstal is actually a difficult one to get in, right next to Borstal Prison. And by the way, if any of you are wondering, yes, there's a town called Borstal which has a Borstal in it, because the name Borstal for children's prison actually comes from this place. Borstal is famous for being the first ever children's prison in the entire world. Well, in the entire naming after things world, I guess you could say. And next to it's Fort Borstal. That one's very secure, you can't get into there. But there's another fort nearby. It's not on this map, but we have to go back in the past to see it. So if we go back to 1946, there is another fort near Fort Borstal, which is Fort Bridgewoods. Fort Borstal's there, and Fort Bridgewoods is there. There is. There's another fort. As you can see, there's a lot of these forts, and that's why some of them were pulled down. It was too many to preserve. And that's the only pictures I got, because when you put Fort Bridgewoods into internet, it's not really much that comes up. So that's one of the few pictures of it, is this historical mapping. That's why. Well, that's why aerial photography gives you more than just a map, because the map, obviously the map doesn't show you forts. And you just see interesting little features that have changed. Like even if you just go 1990s, you can just look around and you see, oh, certain bits are different. You got the Lions Park there. If you go back into Gillingham, this park here is an orchard. Actually, it hasn't changed much. In 1990s, you can see you've got a park there and a little bit of trees there. If we go back to 1946, yeah, the whole park's not there. That entire park was an orchard. So then, another thing worth talking about is Gillingham Station, because the station has moved over the years. So if we go to a modern day map, this is what the station is like today. It's got the little extension glass bit which was added just a couple of years ago. The main building looks like it's probably 50s or maybe 30s or 50s. You've got the bridge going along to the lifts. These lifts were originally gated lifts. They were modernised in 1989 with Cotswold lifts and modernised fairly recently with boring, crappy stanners. There is a building here that is not in use. But if we go on our maps and go back to 1930, you notice that is now the main train station. The station is that main building on the side, and at the front of the station where the main station building is, the building's not there. There was no train station building in those days. And if you look at these marks on the map, that shows it's in a cutting, in a grass cutting. Today it's in a brick cutting where they've bricked it up, and they've added a third platform, because it's now platform 1 where the Charing Cross trains terminate, although they no longer terminate there because that line's been turned into Thameslink and that's now been extended to Rainham. But the extra platform, platform 1, doesn't exist then. It's just 2 platforms and with a much more basic looking little bridge there, and the train station entrance is on the side. If we go back to 1871, there's some changes. The station has moved a bit more further towards the level crossing. Just very slightly, it's moved a bit, little bit towards that level crossing. Interestingly, back then it was called New Brompton Station. And an interesting thing, when they moved the station further away from the original place Gillingham Village, and closer to New Brompton and Old Brompton, but it was at that point they renamed it to Gillingham, despite moving it away from the original Gillingham. So it's interesting how these things change, and the word Gillingham refers to a very different area today than it did back in the past. Now we go to the 1940s aerial photography, and notice this railway coming off of the main line. This railway's still there in the modern day. So you go up this railway, that bit of the line still exists. That's now a trolley graveyard. Everyone keeps chucking trolleys off that bridge there. Go round there, and in the modern day, that ends. It ends there. They built, actually, 2008, you still had that there, but in the modern day, as an Asda's been built there, new Asda shop, and the railway's now cut off there. Go back to 1990s, the railway continued now we're now looking at this railway you're now looking at does not exist in the modern day, because this is where the dual carriageway is. They actually put a dual carriageway onto where the railway used to be. See right there, oh actually those sheds are still there, surprisingly, but the dual carriageway, actually no, it might be different sheds of similar design, because you've got university there. No, those sheds don't exist then, because obviously the dual carriageway goes next to the university. And as long as that railway went along into Chatham Dockyard, so Chatham Dockyard actually was connected to the mainline railway. In the modern day there's still a railway in Chatham Dockyard, but it's just a tramway within the museum and it doesn't connect through to the railway. Another thing I find interesting is mining pits. There was actually a mining pit in Gillingham. It's located, where is it, there. A lot of times what happens is they build a mining pit, and if we go back to 1940 you can see it as a mining pit. They were mining chalk. So when, well, chalk was in demand back then because people would often write, there's no quick wipe ink, so when people wanted to write up plans onto a wall they'd use chalk and chalkboards, and that's where they mined the chalk from. But at some point it was turned into a rubbish dump, so it was, they dug out all the chalk. And actually another thing is the railway. Oh, there's houses there. Okay, that must have been when it was a rubbish dump in that picture, because there was actually a railway that ran out of the chalk pit, down there, past where those houses were, and then to the docks. And that little bit there, by the Strand, was actually a pier where they put the chalk onto boats, and the boats would take the chalk off to London to be sold. Then that obviously got turned into a rubbish dump, and then got turned later on into an orchard. Well, not an orchard, well, that little bit there got turned into an orchard, surprisingly. And then later on, after it became a rubbish dump, it then became a ex-rubbish dump, a park, an unusable piece of wasteland. In other words, it's not even a park, it's just an unusable piece of wasteland where you can't build on it because you've got methane coming out of it, so it's a piece of land that can never be built on. Imagine living in those houses there back when it was a rubbish dump. You buy a house thinking, oh, I'm just buying a house next to a chalk pit. Then they start turning a chalk pit into a rubbish dump. It must have been horrible. And even in the modern day, when they've grassed over the rubbish dump, you can still smell rubbish coming out every now and then. I think that's everything actually. I think I've covered all of the history of Gillingham. I hope you've enjoyed this video about the history of Gillingham. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I have, because, well, somewhere it means something to me, so it's interesting to look around its history. That's the end of the video. Check out my URBEXs, because I've done URBEXs of all, most of the sites around Gillingham Medway I've done URBEXs of.
Good, I'll do that.